And on the line with us is Lamar Waldron, the author of a historian, political commentator, the author of The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination, Ultimate Sacrifice and Legacy of Secrecy, written with a guy named Thom Hartmann, and Watergate, The Hidden History as well. Lamar, let's back to our conversation here. So is there anything from the first half hour of our conversation that you wanted to just wrap up before we move along?
Well, I think we established many parallels between Trump and Nixon, and we've gotten to the organized crime. And I think that's a good place to really start digging in to the JFK assassination.
Okay, go for it. This is the anniversary of that is coming up this week.
Well, actually, it is today.
It's today's the 22nd. Oh my God, you're right.
It's the 22nd. Easy for me to remember because it's my brother's birthday too, and a big part of my life and our life for the past more than quarter century. Doesn't that make us feel old? But so here's the bottom line. In 1960, you had Nixon, 8-year vice president, running against the new, young, charismatic Senator John F. Kennedy. Kennedy had made his bones, his reputation, by going after the Mafia in the 50s when Hoover denied the Mafia existed for much of that time. And the Mafia basically had their run of not just America, but also Cuba. That was very close to America at that time in a, not just a physical sense, but, you know, there was a lot of back and forth.
Batista was our guy.
Right, and it was run by a dictator before Castro came along. And, I mean, the mob was so big. I mean, they weren't just big in New York and Chicago. They were big in medium and small towns across the country. It wasn't just the Mafia.
They created their own town, Las Vegas.
Right, and we should use the term organized crime because, of course, I mean, Meyer Lansky wasn't Jewish. I mean, he was Jewish, not Sicilian, just like, you know, Jack Kirby. So, I mean, I'm sorry, Jack Ruby. So, again, we should call it organized crime. But the bottom line is John F. Kennedy, a senator, and his chief counsel on the Senate committee, his brother Bobby, they went after the Mafia. They dragged Sam Giancana, the mob boss of Chicago, and they dragged Carlos Marcello, the Mafia godfather, much higher ranking than Giancana, the godfather of Louisiana and Texas. They dragged them in front of the committee and grilled them and forced them to take the Fifth, and that's how they made their bones. Well, Nixon was running against JFK. He didn't have the deep pockets of JFK's father. He didn't have the union support JFK had. So he came up with a package deal. He ordered the CIA to hire the mobsters, and some high-ranking mobsters specifically, to assassinate Fidel Castro before the election. At the same time, Nixon,
this would have been 59 or 60.
This is in the fall of 60, September. Yeah. It's actually just 2 or 3 months before the election.
So it was an October surprise.
Right, exactly. That would be the big October surprise, because if Castro were suddenly killed, and nobody expected any Latin American dictator to last more than a few years.
Right, and keep in mind, Nixon at that time was vice president. So he was basically running for re-election, not election. I mean, he was running for promotion to president. But
for 8 years.
Yeah.
And it had to serve essentially as president when Ike was down with his
heart attack,
physical ailment. So the thinking was, if U.S. troops are in Cuba on election day, that the U.S. government, I mean the U.S. electorate, is not going to switch horses in midstream. They're going to stick with the proven 8-year leader with a lot of foreign policy experience, Nixon, and not the young, inexperienced JFK. But that package deal wasn't just to kill Fidel Castro. Nixon also got from Carlos Marcello and from Santo Trafficante, the godfather of Tampa, and a couple of others, including the Chicago Mafia, Sam Giancana, and Tony Provenzano, a mobster, teamster leader in New Jersey, got $1 million bribe to Nixon. $1 million. This is all proven by the Justice Department, in order to stall federal charges against Jimmy Hoffa, which were pending because the Kennedys had basically embarrassed the Eisenhower-Nixon administration into at least, you know, having to pretend like they might take action against Jimmy Hoffa, because the Kennedys had exposed so many mob ties between Hoffa and the Mafia.
Right, so this was the Sun Valley land deal. Yeah.
It was a package deal for Nixon with that $1 million bribe. Long story short, flash ahead to 1963. Obviously, the CIA Mafia plot to kill Fidel before the election did not work, and JFK won a close election, which he did win, by the way. It's not like people have disproven the boast by Giancana, who was giving part of the money to Nixon. That, I mean, no Democrat needs mob help to carry Chicago overwhelmingly. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So, but the new president, JFK, and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, they were not told about the CIA mafia plots with Trafficante and Marcello, and they were continued into Kennedy's administration. That's why the CIA came up with this saying that, oh, well, I'll have 2,000 Cuban exiles invade Cuba, and they'll take care of Castro's 100,000-man army and militia with no trouble. Of course they would not do that. I mean, you and I talked to one of the great heroes of the Bay of Pigs, but, I mean, that was never going to work. But the CIA director and the other high officials in the CIA, they knew that wasn't the real plan. The real plan was to kill Fidel right before the invasion, and then the thinking was that would force JFK to go back on his very public pledges not to use U.S. military force. Well, we know the Bay of Pigs was a failure. One reason was the Kennedys waged that war against the Mafia. They waged it against the very people the CIA was using to try to kill Fidel, and right when the plot to kill Fidel was supposed to be going down, Bobby Kennedy was having Carlos Marcello deported down to Central America. But the Kennedys didn't know, what was going on there. Go ahead to 1963. The Kennedys are waging the biggest war against organized crime America has ever seen and had ever seen to that point. But the CIA, even with a new CIA director, there's a guy named Richard Helms, who was about number 3 or 4 in the CIA at that time. Mm-hmm. The mentor of a gentleman by the name of E. Howard Hunt. And Helms later became CIA director. Helms was continuing the CIA mafia plots with Trafficante and Marcello into 1963, into the fall of 1963, without telling the CIA director, the assistant director, or the number 3, or JFK, or Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, whom JFK had kind of delegated Cuba to at that point. So you can see what's coming up here. In other words, Carlos Marcello was on trial on federal charges with Bobby's federal prosecutor that I interviewed pretty much the whole month of November until the day JFK was shot, when Marcello had bribed a key juror, and he knew he was getting off that day, so he already had his victory celebration planned, supposedly for his court victory that he knew was coming, in reality to celebrate JFK's murder. So you and I also know that the U.S. was getting ready to sort of invade Cuba at the request of the number 3 man in Cuba, Commander Juan Almeida, the founder and leader of the Cuban Army, the highest black official in Cuba, who had offered to JFK months earlier that he would overthrow Fidel for JFK. He had tried to do this, by the way, to the CIA back in the winter of 1961 before the Bay of Pigs, but the CIA hadn't even bothered to follow up with Almeida. So finally, Almeida gets in touch through the people we interviewed with JFK. JFK is going along with it. So 10 days after Dallas, the U.S. was all poised to be invited into Cuba to prevent a Soviet takeover after Commander Almeida had made sure that Fidel and Raul were no longer with us. So, and there were a lot of plans as to how to keep that plan secret, what happened if Castro found out and tried to retaliate against an American official. So much of what we think of as the cover-up for the JFK assassination, federalizing the autopsy, for instance, and federalizing what ordinarily would just be a state investigation at that time, or a city investigation, that actually those plans were being made, and we have copies of them. I quote them and show them in the books, by a committee being directed by Robert Kennedy. And the sad fact is they were put into place even before JFK was killed. The day Marcello went on trial in New Orleans on the federal charges, JFK had to cancel a motorcade in Chicago because there were 4 gunmen on the loose. An ex-Marine with many similarities to Oswald was arrested. He had just gotten a job at a warehouse overlooking the motorcade route, and he was arrested with, rifle and I think an M1 rifle, 1,000 round of ammunition. It was basically going to be Dallas all over again, but in Chicago, thanks to Abraham Bolden and other Chicago Secret Service agents, that plot was discovered. It was thwarted. They weren't able to capture the men. Right. So JFK called off his whole trip.
Lamar, we're just about to hit a break. We're running out of time here on this piece of this. So then this got replicated in Tampa, and that was unsuccessful. And finally in Dallas, they got him.
And the way they did it, and we'll talk more after the break, they got him because the mob was banned from the coup plan, banned from reopening their casinos if the coup was successful, but they were able to infiltrate the coup plan and use parts of that coup plan to kill JFK in such a way that it forced high government officials, including Bobby Kennedy, to cover up so much information for the American public the same way Bobby and John had to cover up the Chicago and Tampa attempts even before Dallas.
Amazing stuff. I'm talking with Lamar Waldron, historian, author, political commentator, the author of The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination, Ultimate Sacrifice, Legacy of Secrecy.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And Watergate, The Hidden History. We'll be right back with Lamar Waldron. And once again, the website is The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination.com. Do I have that right, Lamar?
That's exactly right.
Okay. All right. So you were saying first of all, is there anything you want to add?
We can actually jump all the way to today now.
Okay.
Because the problem is, so people can say, okay, so JFK was killed by the Mafia because, they were being so heavily prosecuted by the Kennedys. They didn't have Cuba to go back to. They weren't going to get in Cuba even if the coup was successful. But they knew, because they had infiltrated the coup. The coup plan and Commander Almeida's name were so secret. You were the first person to get it out of one of our sources, confirmed it with literally someone at the Pentagon. We won't use names. And, only a dozen.
I was threatened. Don't say that name out loud.
I know. And so, but a dozen people in the U.S. government probably knew Commander Almeida's name. But get this, a dozen people who were working for Marcello and Traficante and their associates not only knew about the coup plan, 6 of them, including people like Bernard Barker and David Ferry, Marcello's pilot, actually worked on parts of the coup plan. So you can see how they were able to turn this. So now we get to today, when there are between 50,000 and 1 million pages of JFK assassination records and tapes still secret. A law was passed after the really good Oliver Stone film, JFK, that helped to get the JFK Act passed in 1992 unanimously by Congress to release all the files. 4.5 million pages were released, but the agencies were allowed to keep some of the files secret until 2017, next year, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the big problem is the CIA has already said in court filings, we may keep these secret beyond 2017. And the FBI is also keeping critical files secret. Carlos Marcello confessed to an FBI informant in prison in 1985.
Yeah, Jack Van Lanningham.
Right, a reliable FBI
you and I both know.
Who helped.
In fact, I had lunch with him last year.
Right. And Jack was not just some prison snitch. He was an ordinary guy who had one bad day, wound up in prison. Successful business family man who just got in this alcoholic spiral, found himself in prison, became friends with Marcello because he was the only guy in prison that didn't fear him or ask him for favors. And he even got, and I've talked to the FBI people involved, a bug transistor radio in the prison cell in federal prison he shared, and those hundreds of hours of tapes have never been released.
Even the FBI has those.
On those tapes, Marcello was talking about Ruby and how he really owned Jack Ruby's nightclub and Oswald and David Ferry, all this assassination stuff, including what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. So, but we know this because I have, about 100 pages of FBI files. I've interviewed the FBI people involved, interviewed Jack, of course, the FBI informant. So, why don't we have those tapes? The FBI is saying, there's nothing important on those tapes. Well, the FBI's track record here is not good because they have a 50-year history of hiding important information. All of the information that the FBI, CIA, and Secret Service and Naval Intelligence have about the Tampa attempt, they've never released any of that, not even the newspaper clippings that you and I discovered that helped us establish that. And then I was able to talk to the Tampa chief of police. One of the articles about the Tampa attempt, it only appeared the day after JFK died. It wasn't allowed to be publicized before. But it's a Secret Service file that has never been released, that was actually destroyed. The Secret Service was destroyed shortly after I told a government committee about its existence.
Oh, man, that's amazing. Hang on just a second. Lamar, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Lamar Waldron on the line with us, political commentator, historian, author of The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination, Ultimate Sacrifice, Legacy of Secrecy, Watergate, The Hidden History, and others. Lamar, so to take this from the assassination of JFK by the mob using a program that Nixon put together as an October surprise in 1960 that didn't get pulled off, and using that both to kill Kennedy and to cover and to basically force high public officials to cover up the assassination of Kennedy. That brings us to right now. How?
Well, because once agencies, and Robert Kennedy, to be fair, have covered up, they can never come out and say, oh, yeah, JFK was almost killed in Tampa, because that would underlie, that would take away the Warren Commission, a conclusion of Oswald is just some lone commie nut, even though now we know that they've...
Well, everybody in the Warren Commission is dead. Why don't they just repudiate it?
Well, because once you've withheld crucial information, remember, the Warren Commission is only the first of 5 government investigating committees.
Well, Congress officially ruled that there was a conspiracy.
There was a conspiracy, and they pointed the finger at Marcel and Traficante, but the FBI and other agencies withheld much critical information from the House Select Committee. From the review board created by the 1992 JFK Act, they withheld much information from them, some of which I was able to point high-level review board staff members to, and they went after, and others, the Marcello confession documents should have been the first things the FBI did after the law was passed. They waited till the last minute, to dump 100 pages of files that are still sitting on the tapes. If people want to force the FBI and the other agencies to release these files now instead of next year or never in our lifetimes, they should go to the hidden history of the JFK Assassination.com, where I have a link to a brand new White House petition, and they can follow that link on the hidden history of the JFK Assassination.com, hit that link, go to the White House petition, and it does 2 things. It says that all these files should be released now, and it also calls for a pardon for Abraham Bolden, because when he went to Washington several months after the assassination to tell the Warren Commission staff about the attempts to kill JFK in Chicago, which the Warren Commission had heard a few rumors about, but nothing solid, the attempt to kill JFK in Tampa, which the Warren Commission and none of the other committees knew anything about, and Secret Service laxity in drinking, which, of course, has continued to this day, the Mafia framed Bolden, sent him to prison, had a biased judge who told the jury Bolden was guilty.
He was one of the first black Secret Service agents, too, by the way. The first
black presidential Secret Service agent personally chosen by JFK, one of the most honest, upright, decent people you'll ever meet.
No, he's been on this program several times.
And he's fighting to clear his name. So that's also on the White House petition people can get to from the hidden history of the JFK Assassination.com. So that's all we can do is try to get Obama's attention before he leaves, because I don't know if Trump's going to do any of this.
On this anniversary of the assassination of President John Kennedy.
And tell your friends, tell your neighbors, say, if people want to talk about Trump at Thanksgiving, let them go and say, but look, let's all come together. I mean, who aside from James Comey wants to see the FBI still hiding all of these records after all of this time?
So, Lamar, we've got maybe 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. How has the FBI been helping Republicans for 60 years?
Well, it's proven. People can look for themselves, but definitely, and by the way, if you look at the ABC News tracking poll around the time of the first Comey letter, Comey...
You're talking about
totally
10, 15 days out from the election about Hillary Clinton?
Right. He totally cost... I believe it was 11 days out, Clinton the election, because it was a matter of flipping 50 votes in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania that would have won. And he
50 votes per congressional district.
He put the wind in Trump's sails, and the rest is history. And then when he put out his little letter clearing Hillary, that knocked the latest affair report about the National Enquirer buying and burying the story about the Playboy playmate who allegedly had the affair with Trump. I know from being in a red state like Georgia that many of the white Christian conservatives were holding their nose to vote for Trump. If the days leading up to the election had been full of Trump's affairs, including this affair after he was married with the Playboy playmate, and not the bogus distraction of Hillary's emails, believe me, Trump probably would have even also won North Carolina like the governor did, the Democratic governor, but they could have flipped those 50,000 votes in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. But again, this isn't the only time. If we go back, again, in the 1950s, the commie witch hunt days, which should be the Nixon-McCarthy era, you had J. Edgar Hoover working closely with Nixon to smear liberals as communists and help in the election. J. Edgar Hoover found out about the CIA Mafia plots in 1960, but he kept quiet about it to help Richard Nixon. He kept quiet about it later on, too.
Well, and the FBI went after anti-Vietnam War protesters and civil rights protesters. They went after Martin Luther King. They went after SDS. I mean,
so much about that. Plus, one way we have proof that Nixon committed treason in 1968 was thanks to some FBI investigations, which Hoover kept secret from the American public to help Nixon. Even in 1972, the FBI, even after Hoover's death, the FBI knew that at least two of the Watergate burglars, Bernard Barker and Frank Sturgis, were longtime mob workers for Santo Trafficante, but you never heard the mob mentioned in any of the Watergate hearings or in any of Bob Woodward's books or anything, because the FBI, including Mark Felt Deep Throat, kept that secret and out of the press as a way to help Nixon. In 1976, you had former Warren Commissioner Gerald Ford running, and again, all the stuff the FBI knew about, they knew about Almeida by then. They certainly knew about the CIA Mafia plots. They knew about so much, but they kept it secret from the Church Committee, the Senate Church Committee investigating those things, in order to help former Warren Commissioner Gerald Ford. 1980, you, of course, have the Iran hostage deal. And then in 1984, you had Iran-Contra that the FBI knew a lot of and was keeping secret. That continued in 1988.
So when it's bad news for Republicans, the FBI covers it up. When it's bad news for Democrats, the FBI trumpets it. Is that what you're suggesting?
Sure. I mean, look at Comey himself. Back in 2004, the whole Valerie Plame thing, it was Comey who appointed Patrick Fitzgerald, who helped Bush and Cheney to ridiculous degrees by letting them not testify separately, but testify, sitting on a couch together, holding hands, so they could coordinate.
Without being under oath, in fact, yeah. Lamar Waldron, the hidden history of the JFK Assassination.com is the website. Lamar, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan.